At the grand reading of the last will and testament, David, a struggling black carpenter, stood in his dirty work clothes, surrounded by wealthy lawyers in expensive suits. Richard, the billionaire's arrogant son, threw a broken clock onto the table and laughed, telling David he was nothing but a thief and that he would never see a dime of the fortune. David didn't argue. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, golden gear that he had kept hidden for months. The room went dead silent. When David placed that gear into the clock, it didn't just tell the time. It unlocked a secret that left Richard trembling in fear and changed David's life forever. Before we find out what was inside, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's go back to where it all started. They say time is money. That is the biggest lie they tell you. Time isn't money. Time is a thief. It steals your youth. It steals your patience. And if you are poor, it steals your hope. You can make more money, but you can never make more time. Unless, of course, you know the secret of the clock. David sat in his truck, staring at the piece of paper in his hands. The red ink looked like blood under the yellow street lamp. Final notice. Eviction. He had 48 hours. 2 days to pack up 10 years of life. 2 days to tell his 6-year-old daughter, Mia, that they were going on an adventure, which was just a fancy word for being homeless. David rubbed a hand over his face. His skin was dark, the color of deep mahogany wood, and it felt cold. He was a big man, broad-shouldered with hands that were rough like sandpaper. These were hands that had built half the luxury condos in downtown Chicago. He was a master carpenter. He could look at a piece of wood and know exactly which way the grain wanted to go. He could fix anything, but he couldn't fix this. He looked at the dashboard of his rusted pickup truck. The gas light was on. The heater was broken, blowing air that smelled like burnt dust. Outside, the rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking the earth. It was one of those freezing November storms that turned the city into a gray, angry ocean. He had to get home. Mia was waiting, but his foot felt heavy on the brake. He didn't want to go home. Going home meant looking at the empty walls where the pictures used to be. It meant hearing Mia cough that dry, rattling cough that the doctor said was just asthma, but David knew was from the mold in the basement. He put the truck in gear. The engine groaned, a tired metal sound, and the truck rolled forward into the storm. He took the back roads to save gas. The industrial district was dark. The streetlights here had been broken since the summer, and nobody from the city bothered to come fix them. This was the part of town where dreams went to die. Empty factories with broken windows stared down at him like skulls. David squinted through the windshield. The wipers were slapping back and forth, fighting the water. Ahead, near a row of overflowing trash dumpsters, he saw something. At first, he thought it was a pile of old clothes. Then it moved. David slowed down. A sleek black car, a luxury sedan that cost more than David would earn in 5 lifetimes, was speeding past the dumpsters. As it passed, it hit a deep puddle. A wave of dirty, freezing water rose up and crashed over the shape on the side of the road. The black car didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. The taillights just faded into the rain. But David stopped. He couldn't help it. His father had taught him that a man is defined by what he does when nobody is watching. David pulled the truck over, the tires crunching on broken glass and gravel. He opened the door, and the wind hit him like a physical punch. He ran toward the shape. It was an old man. He was on his knees in the mud, frantically digging. He was wearing a suit, but it was ruined, torn at the shoulder, soaked through, and covered in grime. He wasn't wearing a coat. He was shaking so hard his bones seemed to rattle. "Hey!" David shouted over the roar of the wind. "Hey, old-timer, get up. You're gonna freeze." The old man didn't look up. He was muttering to himself, his voice high and terrified. "The heart. I dropped the heart. Where is it? They are coming. I have to hide it." David grabbed the man's shoulder. The old man flinched violently, letting out a sharp cry, curling into a ball. "Don't hurt me. I don't have it. I don't have the money." "I'm not gonna hurt you," David said, his voice deep and calm, the way he spoke to Mia when she had a nightmare. "I'm just a carpenter. But you can't stay here. You'll die out here." The old man looked up. His eyes were blue, pale and watery, filled with a confusion that David recognized. It was the same look his grandmother had before she passed. Dementia. The mind was there, but the map was lost. "I can't leave," the old man whispered, shivering. "The clock. I broke the clock." Eleanor will be so angry. It's the only way to open the door. David looked down into the mud. Half buried in the sludge was a wooden box. It was smashed. Splinters of wood stuck out like broken bones. It looked like trash, but the old man was holding on to it like it was a diamond. Okay, David said gently. We can take the clock, but we have to go. Now. He scooped the old man up. He was light, frail as a bird. David guided him to the truck, helping him into the passenger seat. He ran back, grabbed the muddy, broken wooden box, and jumped into the driver's seat. Inside the cab, the silence was sudden. The only sound was the old man's teeth chattering and the heavy breathing of the heater trying to work. My name is David, he said. What's your name? The old man stared at the dashboard. He looked at David's dark hands on the steering wheel. He blinked, trying to focus. Arthur, he whispered. I am. Arthur. Okay, Arthur. Let's get you warm. The drive to David's place was short. He rented a small, run-down house with a detached garage that he used as his workshop. He parked the truck and hustled Arthur into the garage. He couldn't take him inside the house yet. He didn't want to scare Mia, and frankly, he didn't want to explain to the babysitter why he had brought a strange homeless man home. The workshop was David's sanctuary. It smelled of sawdust, pine, and varnish. It was the only place in the world that made sense to him. He sat Arthur down in an old armchair in the corner and wrapped a heavy wool blanket around him. He plugged in a space heater and set it right in front of the old man's feet. You stay here, David said. I'm going to get you some dry clothes and some coffee. Don't move. Arthur didn't answer. He was staring at the broken box on his lap, tears silently rolling down his cheeks. David ran inside the house. The babysitter, Mrs. Higgins, was asleep on the couch. He quietly grabbed some of his own clothes, a thick flannel shirt and some sweatpants. They would be huge on Arthur, but they were warm. He made a thermos of hot coffee and grabbed a sandwich he had saved for his own dinner. When he got back to the garage, Arthur hadn't moved. He was rocking back and forth, clutching the broken wood. It's dead, Arthur whispered. The time is dead. David pulled up a stool. He took the box from Arthur's hands. Now that he was under the bright work lights, David could see what it really was. It was a mantel clock, but not a normal one. It was incredibly old. The wood was rare, maybe ebony or blackened mahogany. The carvings were intricate, swirling vines and flowers that looked real enough to touch. But it was shattered. The casing was cracked down the middle, and the face of the clock was twisted. Drink this, David said, handing him the coffee. While Arthur drank, holding the cup with two shaking hands, David put on his magnifying glasses. He wasn't a clockmaker, but he knew how things were built. He knew that everything made by a human hand could be fixed by a human hand, if you had enough patience. He began to clean the mud away delicately, using a soft brush. As the grime cleared, he saw something strange. Most clocks had a door on the back to wind them. This one didn't. It was sealed shut. It was a solid block of mystery. How do you wind it, Arthur? David asked, mostly to himself. Arthur's eyes suddenly snapped wide open. He leaned forward, looking around the garage as if he expected someone to jump out of the shadows. You don't wind it, Arthur whispered. You solve it. David paused. He looked closer at the wood. The cracks weren't just random. The wood had split along a seam. He carefully pried the casing apart where it had shattered. Inside, there were gears. Hundreds of them. Tiny brass teeth, springs, and levers. But there was something else. Tucked deep inside the mechanism, hidden behind the main spring, was a loose piece. It had fallen out when the clock broke. David reached in with his tweezers and pulled it out. It was a single gear. But it wasn't brass. It was heavy. It was gold. Solid gold. And on the surface of the gear, there were tiny numbers etched into the metal. Coordinates. David felt a chill go down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. This wasn't just a clock. This was a safe. A puzzle. And this golden gear was the key. Hide it, Arthur hissed. He grabbed David's wrist with surprising strength. He wants it. Richard. My son. He wants the heart. He wants to tear it all down. Who is Richard? David asked. The wolf, Arthur said, his eyes wild. The wolf in the suit. He locked me away. He said I was crazy. He said I forgot everything. But I didn't forget the combination. I didn't forget where I hid the truth. David looked at the gold gear in his hand, then at the terrified old man. He quickly slipped the gold gear into the deep pocket of his work apron. He didn't know why, but he trusted the fear in Arthur's eyes. Okay, Arthur, David said softly. I believe you. David went to work. He mixed a special glue, a resin he used for antique furniture. He clamped the wood together. He used steam to bend the fibers back into place. He worked for hours. The storm raged outside, pounding against the metal garage door, but inside, it was quiet. Arthur watched him. The coffee and the warmth had calmed him down. He watched David's hands move with a rhythm, sanding, polishing, fixing. You have good hands, Arthur said softly. Honest hands. They're just hands, David muttered. No, Arthur said. Some men use their hands to take. You use yours to mend. That is rare. By the time the sun began to rise, the storm had passed. The clock sat on the workbench. It looked whole again. The cracks were invisible, hidden by David's skill. It was beautiful, but it wasn't ticking. Without the golden gear inside, it was frozen. A beautiful, silent box. Suddenly, there was a sound outside. Tires screeching on wet pavement. Car doors slamming. Arthur froze. The color drained from his face. He's here. Bam, bam, bam. Someone was pounding on the garage door. Open up. We know he's in there. David stood up. He grabbed a heavy wrench from the table. He stood in front of Arthur, shielding the old man with his body. He hit the button to open the garage door. The metal door rolled up slowly, revealing the gray morning light. Standing in David's driveway were 3 men. 2 of them were huge, wearing dark security uniforms. In the middle stood a man in a gray suit that looked sharp enough to cut skin. He was young, maybe 30, with slicked back hair and a face that was handsome but cruel. This was Richard. Richard stepped into the garage, wrinkling his nose at the smell of sawdust. He looked at David, a black man in dirty work clothes holding a wrench, with a look of pure disgust. Well, Richard sneered. I see you found my father. I should have you arrested for kidnapping. He was dying in a ditch, David said, his voice low and steady. I saved his life. You saw a confused old man and thought you could get a reward, Richard spat. I know your type. Scavengers. Richard snapped his fingers. The 2 security guards moved forward. They grabbed Arthur roughly by the arms. No, Arthur cried out, struggling weakly. Don't take me back there. I don't want to go back to the White Room. Shut up, Dad, Richard said coldly. You're embarrassing yourself. Richard looked around the workshop. His eyes landed on the workbench. He saw the clock. He walked over and picked it up. He examined it, turning it over in his hands. He frowned. He shook it. It made a dull thudding sound. You tried to fix it? Richard laughed. A cold, dry sound. You think you can fix this? It's junk. Just like him. Richard tucked the clock under his arm. He turned to David. If you ever come near my family again, Richard said, stepping close to David, I will bury you. I have lawyers who can make sure you never work in this state again. Do you understand me, boy? David tightened his grip on the wrench. He wanted to swing it. He wanted to knock that arrogant smile off Richard's face. But he thought of Mia inside the house. He thought of the eviction notice. He couldn't go to jail. Not today. Get out of my garage, David said. Richard smirked. He turned and walked away, the guards dragging a weeping Arthur behind him. As they shoved Arthur into the back of the SUV, the old man locked eyes with David. He didn't say a word. He just tapped his chest, right over his heart. David watched them drive away. He stood alone in the silence of his workshop. He felt defeated. He felt small. He reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the cold, heavy metal of the golden gear. Richard had the clock. He had the money. He had the power. But he didn't have the key. David pulled the gear out and looked at the coordinates etched into the gold. What were you trying to tell me, Arthur? He whispered. The silence in the garage was heavier than the storm. David stood there for a long time, gripping the golden gear in his pocket until his knuckles hurt. He wanted to chase after the black SUV. He wanted to fight. But he looked at his watch. It was 7 a.m. Mia would be waking up soon. And in 24 hours, the sheriff was coming to put a padlock on his front door. David walked back into the house. He washed the grease off his hands and put on his dad face. It was a mask he wore to hide the fear. When he walked into the kitchen, Mia was sitting at the table, eating dry cereal because the milk had gone bad 2 days ago. She looked up at him with big, brown eyes. She was small for her age, fragile, but she had a smile that could light up a basement. Morning, Daddy, she chirped. Did you fix the storm? David forced a smile. He kissed the top of her head. I tried, baby. I tried. Listen, we have to pack today. Remember, I told you we were going on an adventure. To the castle? She asked. David's heart broke a little. Not a castle, sweetie. Hey, a hotel. The Starlight Motel. It's got a neon sign. It's gonna be cool. He hated lying to her. The Starlight Motel wasn't cool. It was a place where desperate people went when they had nowhere else. It was a place with thin walls and sirens screaming all night. But he couldn't tell her that. They spent the day packing. It didn't take long. When you are poor, you don't own much. 2 suitcases, a box of toys, and David's tools. His tools were his life. If he lost those, he lost everything. The next morning, the sheriff arrived right on time. He wasn't mean about it. He just looked tired. He watched as David loaded the last box into the rusted truck. He watched as David locked the front door and handed over the key. "Good luck, David," the sheriff said, looking at the ground. David didn't say anything. He just nodded, got in the truck, and drove away without looking back. He knew if he looked back, he might cry, and he couldn't let Mia see him cry. The motel room smelled like stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. The carpet was sticky. David set up Mia's bed in the corner and put her favorite stuffed rabbit on the pillow to make it look like home. "Daddy, the TV doesn't work," Mia said, pressing the buttons. "I'll fix it later, baby," David said. "I have to go out. I have to go find work." David left Mia with the neighbor from the next room, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Gomez who lived there with her cat. Then he hit the streets. He drove to the construction site on 5th Avenue. He knew the foreman there. They always needed good carpenters. David walked onto the site, his tool belt slung over his shoulder. "Hey, Mike," he called out. "I'm looking for a few shifts." Mike, the foreman, looked up. His face went pale. He looked around nervously, then walked over to David, keeping his voice low. "David, you gotta go." "What?" David asked, confused. "I just need a couple of days of work. You know I'm good for it." "I can't hire you, David. Nobody can." Mike looked over his shoulder. "The order came down this morning. From the top. Sterling Properties. They own this site. They own half the sites in the city." David felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Sterling Properties?" "Yeah," Mike whispered. "Richard Sterling. His office sent out a blacklist. Your name, your picture. It says you're a thief and a liability. If I hire you, I lose my contract. I'm sorry, David. You need to leave." David walked back to his truck, his legs feeling heavy. He drove to another site. Same story. He went to a small renovation company. The owner wouldn't even open the door. Richard wasn't just satisfied with taking the clock. He wanted to destroy David. He wanted to make sure the man who saw his father vulnerable would never be able to stand up again. That night, David sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed. Mia was asleep. The neon sign outside flickered, casting a red light across the room. Buzz. Click. Buzz. Click. David pulled the golden gear out of his pocket. It was heavy, warm, and real. It was the only thing Richard didn't control. He turned it over under the lamp. He looked at the numbers etched into the gold. 41.8781 degrees north, 87.6298 degrees west. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked, and typed in the numbers. A map popped up. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't a vault. The red pin dropped right in the middle of the city. A specific building. The Chicago Public Library. The old wing. David frowned. Why would a billionaire hide a secret in a library? "What were you doing, Arthur?" David whispered to the empty room. "What is this?" Across town, in a mansion that looked more like a museum than a home, Richard Sterling was screaming. "Open it. Just break it open." Richard stood in his father's study. The mahogany clock sat on the heavy oak desk. It looked innocent. It looked simple, but it was driving him crazy. Standing in front of him was a locksmith, a man who had been cracking safes for 30 years. The locksmith was sweating. "I can't, Mr. Sterling," the locksmith said, wiping his forehead. "I've tried drills. I've tried magnets. This isn't a normal lock. The wood, it's reinforced with something inside. If I force it, the mechanism will trigger a failsafe. It feels like there's a vial of acid or ink inside. If I break the wood, it will destroy whatever papers are inside. I don't care how it feels." Richard yelled, throwing a glass against the wall. It shattered. "My father was a senile old man. He didn't build a fortress, he built a toy." "It's a puzzle, sir," the locksmith said, packing up his tools. "And it's missing a piece. The tumblers won't engage. There's a gap in the gear train. Without that missing piece, this box will stay closed forever." Richard stared at the clock. His eyes narrowed. He remembered the garage. He remembered the carpenter. He remembered how the carpenter had been fiddling with the clock all night. The carpenter, Richard hissed. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number. Send the team back. Not the lawyers. The other team. Go to the motel where he's staying. Tear it apart. Find the piece. Back at the Starlight Motel, David woke up with a start. Someone was banging on the door. It wasn't a knock. It was a warning. Police. Open up. David jumped out of bed. He looked at Mia. She was still sleeping, curled up in a ball. He went to the door and opened it a crack. 2 officers stood there. But they weren't regular cops. They were Child Protective Services, flanked by police. A woman in a gray suit stepped forward holding a clipboard. David Williams? She asked. Her voice was flat, like a robot. Yes. We received an anonymous tip about child endangerment. We have reports that you are living in a motel with a minor, without adequate food or heat, and that you are involved in criminal activity. Criminal activity? David laughed, but it was a nervous sound. I'm a carpenter. I just lost my house. That's not a crime. We need to inspect the room, the woman said, pushing past him. She walked in, looking at the peeling wallpaper, the single bag of chips on the table, the cracked window. She looked at Mia sleeping on the stained sheets. She made a check mark on her clipboard. The sound of the pen scratching the paper was loud in the small room. This environment is not suitable for a child, she said. We have emergency custody orders. David felt the blood drain from his face. No, you can't. She's my daughter. She's all I have. You should have thought of that before you dragged her into this mess, the woman said. Grab the girl. The officer stepped forward. No, David shouted. He blocked the officer's path. Don't touch her. The officer put a hand on his taser. Sir, stand down. Don't make this worse. Mia woke up. She saw the strangers. She saw her dad shaking. She started to cry. Daddy, she screamed. It's okay, baby. It's okay. David yelled, tears streaming down his face as the officers held him back. I'll come for you. I promise. I'll fix it. They took her. They took her screaming, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The woman handed David a piece of paper. You have a hearing in 30 days. If you don't have a stable home and a job by then, she goes into the system permanently. They left. The door slammed shut. David stood in the middle of the empty room. The silence was deafening. The only sound was the neon sign outside. Buzz. Click. Buzz. Click. He fell to his knees. He screamed. A sound of pure agony that came from the bottom of his soul. He punched the floor until his knuckles bled. They took his house. They took his job. Now they had taken his heart. He lay on the floor for an hour, staring at the ceiling. He wanted to give up. He wanted to just close his eyes and disappear. But then, he felt it. The hard lump in his pocket. The gear. Richard did this. Richard made the call. It wasn't about the child. It was about leverage. He was squeezing David. He was trying to break him so he would hand over the missing piece. David sat up. He wiped the tears from his face. His eyes were red, but they weren't sad anymore. They were dangerous. He walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. He looked in the mirror. He didn't see a broken man. He saw a father who had nothing left to lose. You want to fight, Richard? David whispered to the mirror. Okay, you got one. He took the golden gear out and looked at it one last time. 41.8781 degrees north, 87.6298 degrees west. The library. Arthur had hidden something there. Something big enough to scare his son. Something big enough to kill for. David grabbed his tool belt. He didn't have a car. The truck was out of gas. He didn't have money for a bus. So he started walking. He walked through the rain. He walked through the cold. He walked toward the center of the city, toward the coordinates. He wasn't just a carpenter anymore. He was a man on a mission. And he was going to dismantle Richard's life, piece by piece, just like he took apart a wall. As he walked, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I know you have the piece. Bring it to the mansion tonight, and you get your daughter back. Come alone. David stared at the screen. It was a trap. He knew it was a trap. If he went there, they would take the gear and probably kill him. But he also knew something Richard didn't. He knew where the map led. David typed a reply. I'm coming. He shoved the phone in his pocket. He wasn't going to the mansion. Not yet. First, he had to go to the library. He had to find out what Arthur was trying to say. The night was dark, but for the first time in days, the rain stopped. The clouds parted, revealing a sliver of a moon. It looked like a closing eye. David pulled his hood up and disappeared into the shadows of the city. The game had changed. Richard thought he was playing chess with a pawn. He didn't realize the pawn was about to become a king. The Chicago Public Library is a fortress of stone and silence sitting in the middle of a noisy city. David stood at the bottom of the massive steps. He looked like a shadow. His clothes were stained with mud, his eyes were red from lack of sleep, and his heart was heavy with the loss of his daughter. But his hand was still in his pocket, gripping the cold, hard metal of the golden gear. He walked up the steps. The security guard at the front desk looked him up and down. David kept his head low, pulling his hood tight. He walked past the metal detectors and headed straight for the elevators. He looked at the coordinates on his phone again. The Sterling wing. 3rd floor. Of course. Arthur Sterling hadn't just hidden his secret in any library. He had hidden it in the wing he paid for. The wing named after his family. The elevator dinged. The door slid open. The 3rd floor was empty. It was the rare books and antiques section. The air smelled like old paper and dust. Rows and rows of tall, wooden bookshelves stretched out into the darkness. David walked down the aisle. He counted the shelves. Row 4, Section 1, Shelf 8. He stopped. There was nothing there. Just a row of old encyclopedias from the 1920s. David pulled them off the shelf, one by one. He checked behind them. Nothing. He checked under the shelf. Nothing. He felt a wave of panic. Was he wrong? Was Arthur just a confused old man scribbling random numbers on a gear? David leaned his forehead against the wooden bookshelf. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. Then he smelled it. Under the smell of old paper, there was something else. Cedar oil. And wax. David opened his eyes. He looked at the wood of the bookshelf itself. He wasn't a librarian, but he was a carpenter. He knew wood. He ran his rough hand along the edge of the shelf. It was oak. Solid, quarter-sawn oak. Beautiful work. But his fingers felt a tiny ridge. A seam that was almost invisible to the naked eye. David knelt down. He looked closely at the decorative molding on the side of the shelf. It wasn't just decoration. It was a latch. "You clever old man," David whispered. He pressed his thumb against the molding and pushed up. Click. A small panel in the wood popped open. It wasn't a secret door to a room. It was a tiny hiding spot, no bigger than a shoebox, built right into the frame of the bookshelf. David reached inside. His hand closed around a thick, leather-bound notebook. He pulled it out. On the cover, embossed in gold leaf, were the initials, A.S. Arthur Sterling. David sat on the floor of the library aisle and opened the book. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. It was filled with numbers, dates, and names. David scanned the pages. January 4th, transfer to Shell Company B for $1 million. February 10th, bribe to zoning commissioner, $500,000. March 15th, falsified safety reports for the Riverside project. David's eyes widened. This wasn't just a diary. This was evidence. It was a record of every illegal thing Richard Sterling had done to take control of the company. Embezzlement, fraud, bribery. Arthur knew. The old man wasn't senile. He was trapped. He had been gathering evidence against his own son, waiting for the right moment to expose him. But Richard had locked him away before he could use it. On the very last page, there was a handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky, written by a man in fear. To whoever finds this, Richard thinks I am broken. He thinks my mind is gone. But I see everything. I built a clock for my wife, Eleanor. It is unbreakable. Inside the clock is the original deed to the company and my true last will. It leaves everything to the Sterling Foundation to give back to the city Richard is trying to destroy. The clock cannot be opened without the golden gear, and the gear cannot be turned without the hand of a maker. If you are reading this, you are my last hope. Don't let the wolf win. David closed the book. His hands were shaking. He wasn't just holding a gear anymore. He was holding the fate of $1 billion empire. And he was holding the proof that could send Richard to prison for 20 years. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a news alert. David looked at the screen. The world stopped. Breaking news. Real estate tycoon Arthur Sterling dead at 82. The photo on the screen showed Arthur in his prime, smiling in a tuxedo. The headline said he had passed away peacefully in his sleep at the family estate. "No," David whispered. "No, Arthur. You can't be gone." David felt a tear slide down his cheek. He had only known the man for one night. But that night had meant everything. Arthur was the only person who had looked at David and seen a human being, not a failure. David swiped the screen. A video started playing. It was Richard. Richard was standing in front of the mansion, wearing a black suit, looking somber and sad. Fake tears were glistening in his eyes. "My father was a great man," Richard told the reporters. "It is a tragedy, but I will honor his legacy. I will take full control of Sterling Properties effective immediately. And as per his wishes, the funeral will be private. Just family." David gripped the phone so hard the screen cracked further. "Liar," David hissed. "You killed him. You let him die." He looked at the time. The funeral was tomorrow morning. The reading of the will would be right after. Richard thought he had won. He had the body. He had the company. He had the clock. He probably thought the clock was just a broken toy, useless without the key. He didn't know David had the notebook. David stood up. He put the notebook in his jacket. He put the gear in his pocket. He left the library. The city felt different now. It wasn't just cold. It was waiting. He walked to the nearest shelter. He didn't go in to sleep. He went to the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like a homeless man. He looked like a victim. "Not today," he said. He took his last $20, the money he was saving for food, and went to a thrift store around the corner. He found a suit. It was old, a little too big in the shoulders, and it smelled like mothballs. But it was black. He bought a white shirt and a black tie. He went to a public restroom and shaved using cold water and cheap soap. He slicked his hair back. He put on the suit. He looked in the mirror again. He didn't look like a carpenter anymore. He looked like a man going to war. He sat on a park bench and waited for the sun to rise. He thought about Mia. He thought about her crying as they took her away. "Hold on, baby," he whispered to the sky. "Daddy is coming." Morning came. The sky was gray, the color of slate. David walked to the Sterling estate. It was miles away, in the richest part of the city. He walked until his feet blistered in the cheap dress shoes. When he arrived at the massive iron gates, there were news vans everywhere. Reporters were shouting, cameras were flashing. Security guards were checking a list. David walked up to the gate. "Name," the guard barked. It was the same guard from the garage, the one who had dragged Arthur away. The guard looked at David. He squinted. He didn't recognize him in the suit, clean-shaven. David said. "David Williams." The guard checked the list. "You're not on the list. Private event." "Beat it. I have a delivery for Richard Sterling," David said calmly. "Yeah? What is it?" David patted his chest pocket where the notebook was. "His inheritance." The guard laughed. "Look, pal, get lost before I—" Suddenly, a black limousine pulled up to the gate. The window rolled down. A silver-haired man looked out. He had sharp eyes and glasses perched on his nose. It was Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, the only man Richard couldn't fire. "What is the problem here?" Mr. Henderson asked. "Just some crasher, sir," the guard said. "Says he has something for Mr. Sterling." Mr. Henderson looked at David. He looked at his cheap suit. He looked at his rough, carpenter hands. Then he looked at David's eyes. Arthur had mentioned a carpenter. In his last moments of clarity, Arthur had told his lawyer about a man in the rain. "Let him in," Mr. Henderson said. "But sir," the guard protested. "I said, let him in," Mr. Henderson commanded. "He is with me." The gate buzzed open. David walked through. He walked up the long driveway, past the fountain, past the luxury cars. He walked up the marble steps of the mansion. Inside, the house was silent. A few dozen people in black were standing around, drinking champagne and whispering. Richard was in the center of the room, holding court. He looked triumphant. He was laughing softly with a business partner. Then he saw David. Richard's smile vanished. He went pale. He walked over, his face twisting into a snarl. "How did you get in here?" Richard hissed, keeping his voice low so the reporters wouldn't hear. "I told you to come alone to the back door. I told you to bring the peace." "I brought it," David said. His voice echoed in the large hall. "Give it to me," Richard demanded, holding out his hand. "Give it to me, and I'll tell CPS to drop the case. You can have your brat back." David didn't move. He looked at the room. He saw the clock sitting on a table in the corner. It was still broken, still silent. "No," David said loudly. The room went quiet. People turned to look. "Excuse me," Richard said, his eyes darting around nervously. "I said no," David said, his voice rising. "I'm not doing this in the back alley. We're doing this right here, in front of everyone." "Security," Richard shouted. "Get this trespasser out of here." Two guards started to move toward David. "Wait." Mr. Henderson's voice boomed from the doorway. The lawyer stepped forward. "This man is a beneficiary. He stays." "Beneficiary?" Richard laughed. He's a carpenter. He's a nobody. The will, Mr. Henderson said, holding up a document. Your father added a codicil 3 days ago. It says that before the estate can be settled, the clock must be opened, and only the one who holds the key of the heart can open it. Richard froze. He looked at David. He looked at the bulge in David's pocket. He stole it. Richard screamed. That's my property. It belongs to the clock, David said. He walked past Richard. He walked toward the table in the corner. The room was deadly silent. Every eye was on the black man in the cheap suit. David stood in front of the clock. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the golden gear. It caught the light of the chandelier. He looked at Richard. You wanted to know what your father left you, Richard? You wanted the treasure. Don't you touch that, Richard warned, stepping forward. David ignored him. He didn't just place the gear in. He knew the secret. He knew the wood. He pressed the hidden latch on the side of the casing, the same latch mechanism he had found on the library shelf. The side of the clock slid open. David inserted the golden gear into the gap in the mechanism. It clicked into place perfectly. Click. The sound was loud in the silent room. David turned the gear. Once, twice, 3 times. The clock shuddered. The springs groaned. And then, tick, tock, tick, tock. The pendulum began to swing. The hands began to move. But that wasn't all. The top of the clock, the decorative crown made of ebony wood, slowly began to rise. It was a drawer. A hidden compartment. Richard gasped. He lunged forward. That's mine. David was faster. He reached into the hidden compartment and pulled out a rolled-up piece of parchment. It was tied with a red ribbon. David handed it to Mr. Henderson. Read it, David said. Mr. Henderson unrolled the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Richard. Then he looked at the gathered crowd. This, Mr. Henderson announced, is the last will and testament of Arthur Sterling. Richard was shaking. It's a fake. He forged it. It is dated and notarized by me, Mr. Henderson said coldly. And it reads as follows. To my son, Richard, I leave nothing. You have stolen enough from me in life. I will not let you steal in death. A gasp went through the room. Cameras flashed blindingly. I leave my entire estate, Mr. Henderson continued, his voice trembling slightly. My company, my fortune, and my home. To the man who saved me when I was nothing but a beggar in the rain. To Mr. David Williams. On one condition. David looked up. He hadn't expected this. He thought the money was going to charity. The condition, Henderson read, is that he uses the resources to rebuild the parts of the city that have been forgotten. That he builds homes for those who have none. Richard let out a scream of pure rage. He grabbed a champagne bottle from a waiter's tray and swung it at David. I'll kill you. David didn't flinch. He caught Richard's wrist in midair. His grip was like iron. Years of swinging a hammer had made his hand strong. He twisted the bottle out of Richard's hand and shoved him back. Richard fell into the table, knocking the champagne tower over. Glass shattered everywhere. It's over, Richard, David said. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were coming. But this time, they weren't coming for David. David looked at the clock. It was ticking steadily. A strong, healthy heartbeat. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the lawyer. I have to go, David said. Go. Mr. Henderson asked. Mr. Williams, you just inherited billions of dollars. Where are you going? I have to go get my daughter, David said. We have a house to build. The mansion was in chaos. The sound of sirens grew louder, filling the large hall where the rich and powerful stood frozen in shock. Richard Sterling was on the floor, held down by 2 security guards, the same guards who had dragged his father away just days before. They knew who the new boss was now. David didn't look back at Richard. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just walked over to Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. Here, David said, pulling the leather notebook from his jacket pocket. This was in the library. It shows everything Richard did. The bribes. The stolen money. It's all there. Mr. Henderson took the book. He looked at Richard, who was screaming insults at the ceiling. I will handle this, Mr. Williams, the lawyer said. The police will be very interested in this. Go. Go get your daughter. David ran. He didn't wait for a car. He ran down the long driveway, past the iron gates, and out onto the street. He flagged down a taxi. He didn't have cash, but he pulled a gold watch from his pocket, one Richard had dropped in the scuffle, and handed it to the driver. Take me to the Department of Child Services, David said. Drive fast. The taxi driver looked at the expensive watch. then at David. He nodded and floored the gas. The ride felt like it took 100 years. David watched the city fly by. He looked at his hands. They were still shaking. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. He was a billionaire. The paper in his pocket said he owned half the city. But none of that mattered. If he didn't get Mia back, he was the poorest man on earth. When the taxi screeched to a halt in front of the gray government building, David jumped out. He ran through the glass doors. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Sir, you can't just run in here." "I'm here for my daughter," David said, his voice booming. "Mia Williams." "Where is she?" The social worker from the motel, the woman with the cold eyes, walked out of an office. She saw David in his cheap, ill-fitting suit. She crossed her arms. "Mr. Williams," she sighed. "I told you. You have a hearing in 30 days. You cannot be here. You have no job, no home, and—" The doors behind David opened again. Mr. Henderson walked in. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 3 other lawyers in sharp navy suits. They looked like a squadron of fighter jets. "Excuse me," Mr. Henderson said, his voice smooth as silk. "I am representing Mr. Williams, and I believe there has been a mistake." The social worker scoffed. "A mistake?" He was living in a motel room with no food. "Mr. Williams," Henderson said loudly, placing a document on the counter, "is the sole owner of Sterling Properties and the Sterling Foundation. His net worth is approximately $4 billion. He currently owns this building we are standing in, and I believe he would like to take his daughter home. Now." The social worker's jaw dropped. She looked at the papers. She looked at David. Her face went pale. I didn't know," she stammered. "Get her," David said softly. A moment later, a door opened down the hall. A small girl in a pink shirt walked out. She was holding her stuffed rabbit by the ear. Her eyes were puffy from crying. She looked up. She saw him. "Daddy." David dropped to his knees. Mia ran. She hit his chest with enough force to knock the wind out of him. David wrapped his big arms around her. He buried his face in her hair. He smelled her shampoo, strawberries and rain. "I got you," David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I got you, baby. I promise, I will never let go again." "Did you fix it?" Mia asked, looking at his face. "Did you fix the bad things?" David smiled. "Yeah, baby. I fixed it. We're going home." They didn't go to the mansion. David didn't want to live in a museum. He bought a house. A real house. In a neighborhood with trees and sidewalks. It had a big backyard for Mia and a huge garage for David. But David didn't stop working. 3 months later, the sun was shining on a vacant lot in the middle of the city, the same lot where David had been turned away from a job just weeks before. But today, the sign on the fence didn't say "No hiring." It said, "The Arthur Sterling Community Center. Future home of affordable housing." David wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing his work boots, his jeans, and his tool belt. He was standing on the framing of a new wall, holding a hammer. Below him, a group of young men and women were watching. They were people from the shelters. People who had been forgotten. David had hired them all. He wasn't just giving them money. He was teaching them a trade. "All right, listen up," David shouted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Wood has a grain. It has a direction it wants to go. You can't force it. You have to work with it. People are the same way. If you give them support, they will stand tall. If you try to break them, they will snap." A black sedan pulled up. Mr. Henderson got out. He walked through the sawdust to the edge of the frame. "Mr. Williams," the lawyer called up. "You have a board meeting in an hour. The investors are waiting." David smiled. He drove a nail into the wood with one clean strike. Bang. "Tell them to wait," David said. "I'm building a wall. This is important." Mr. Henderson smiled and nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll tell them you're busy." That evening, David sat on the porch of his new house. Mia was catching fireflies in the yard. The air smelled of cut grass and barbecue. On the table next to him sat the clock. It was fully restored now. The mahogany shone in the twilight. The pendulum swung back and forth with a steady, rhythmic sound. Tick, tock, tick, tock. David took a sip of iced tea. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the golden gear. He had taken it out of the clock just to hold it. He liked the weight of it. He thought about Arthur. He thought about the man dying in that cold, big house, surrounded by things, but having no one. Arthur had been right. The clock was a test. Richard had failed because he only saw the gold. He only saw the value of the object. He tried to force it open. David had succeeded because he saw the broken pieces. He saw the need for repair. He saw the human being inside the mess. Mia ran up to the porch, out of breath, holding a jar with a glowing bug inside. "Daddy, look. I caught a star." David laughed. He pulled her onto his lap. "You sure did, baby." "Daddy." "Yeah. Are we rich now?" David looked at the big house. He looked at the clock. Then he looked at his daughter's happy face. "Yeah, Mia," David said. "We're rich. But not because of the money." He tapped the golden gear against the table. "We're rich because we have time," David said. "And this time, we're going to use it to build something that lasts." The camera pans out, rising above the porch, above the house, above the city. We see the lights of Chicago turning on, one by one. We see the new construction site where the homeless shelter is being built. We see the library where the truth was hidden. And finally, the screen fades to black, with only the sound of the clock remaining. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The end. Author's note to the listener. Thank you for listening to this story. In a world that tells you to chase the gold, be the one who stops to fix the broken pieces. You never know who you might be saving. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments. If you found $1 billion tomorrow, what is the first thing you would build? See you in the next video.